The interspecies exchange classroom on Orbital Station Hesperia was colder than Orion Zahner expected. Not unbearable, just cold enough that a draft could slither past the seams of his standard-issue Alliance education uniform and raise tiny bumps along his forearms. Goosebumps. A regular thing on Earth. But apparently, not here. He scratched his arm distractedly as Professor Yilger droned at the front of the spherical classroom. The alien's bulbous head pulsed with each syllable, its skin a translucent pale blue that shimmered under the station's artificial lighting. Across from Orion, a student from the Varelian system named Janta squinted at him, her elongated pupils narrowing. "Orion," she whispered, nudging him with one of her 3 elbow-jointed arms. "You are disfiguring." "Huh?" Orion blinked, pulling his arm out of her reach. "Your dermal layer," she insisted. "It is raising in distended patterns. Are you undergoing cellular collapse?" Orion glanced down, realized she meant the goosebumps, and chuckled. "No, it's just a weather reaction. Cold air. My skin does this sometimes." Janta recoiled slightly. "A reaction to temperature? That is not listed in the database. Should we report you to the medical wing?" "No. Seriously, it's normal. Humans get these when we're cold or sometimes scared." Several other students turned toward him. A few made soft exhaling sounds, the Varelian equivalent of alarm. Professor Yilger fell silent. All 23 eyes in the room turned toward Orion. Orion swallowed. "I'm fine. Just chill bumps." Professor Yilger floated toward him, his body gliding on low-frequency magnetic pads. "Explain this phenomenon, Earthborn." Orion stood, the skin on his arms still prickled. "It's called goosebumps. It's like my body's way of reacting to cold. The muscles at the base of hair follicles contract. Makes the hair stand up. Common mammalian response." Janta whispered again. "Goose. Bumps? You are naming it after a terrestrial fowl." "Yeah, geese. Their skin looks like this when plucked." Professor Yilger made a note on the holopad floating beside him. "Unlisted reflex. Unexpected. Potentially contagious." No, it's not contagious. I promise." Yilger spun to face the class. "We will require a field demonstration and medical observation." Class dismissed. "Zahner, remain." Orion sighed as the other students filed out, a few whispering and glancing back. He rubbed his arms, the bumps already fading now that the station's internal temperature was rising for the midday cycle. Yilger rotated slowly as he examined Orion. "You are certain this is not a degenerative condition?" "Positive." "Then why does it resemble haptic deterioration symptoms in the oral?" "Because biology is weird," Orion offered. Unacceptable hypothesis. The door hissed open, and 2 medical techs entered, one from the trash species, all pale folds and blinking nodules, and another, a squat, leathery-skinned Avronian. "Subject displays dermal irregularity," Yilger explained. "Initiate scan." "Wait. No, I told you I'm fine." The Avronian already had the scanner out. "We must confirm non-contagion. Protocol B7. Orion groaned, but sat on the diagnostic table. "It's just goosebumps, guys." The trash tech waved a scanner over his skin. Elevated piloerection. No cellular decay. Core temperature low normal. No sign of internal distress. "See?" Orion gestured. "Just a weather reaction." Yilger's eyes blinked in sequence. "Then you must educate the class." "A full demonstration. Tomorrow. Explain the physiological mechanism. Demonstrate control, if possible." "I can't control goosebumps. They just happen." "Then provoke them. Your assignment is to make your skin do this again in a controlled setting." Orion stared at him. "You want me to give myself goosebumps in front of the class?" "Correct." The next day, the classroom was even colder. Yilger had intentionally dropped the temperature by several degrees. Orion stood before the semicircle of alien students, arms bare, shivering. "This is wild," he muttered under his breath, rubbing his arms. "Begin," Yilger prompted. Orion exhaled through clenched teeth. "Okay. So goosebumps. This is what happens when a human body detects a sudden change in temperature or extreme emotional stimulus. Cold, fear, even nostalgia sometimes. It's an involuntary reflex." He looked down. His arms were already prickled again. The class murmured. "See? This isn't disease. It's just my body trying to trap heat by lifting tiny hairs. Doesn't really work any more evolutionary leftover." Janta raised one hand. You said emotional state can also trigger this. Can you replicate it now without cold? Orion hesitated. I mean, maybe. He closed his eyes and thought of a memory. Not cold or scary, but something powerful. The time he watched the Earth rise from orbit for the first time. The blue marble hanging over a black void. The pride. The awe. When he opened his eyes again, his arms were covered in goosebumps. The room erupted in noise. Excited, confused, skeptical. Yulger floated forward. Fascinating. Emotional control over epidermal reflexes. We must test further. Orion's stomach dropped. What kind of tests? The next week was a blur of temperature chambers, emotional stimuli experiments, and reflex testing rooms. Orion endured holographic projections of everything from snowstorms to simulated threats. At one point, they showed him a video of a puppy reunion with its soldier owner. He nearly cried. And yes, the goosebumps returned. By week's end, his name was in the station's daily digest. Human weather reaction, emotional reflex, or evolutionary anomaly? He walked into the cafeteria, tray in hand, and found Jana waiting. You are famous, she said flatly. I didn't ask to be. You are an anomaly. That is close enough. Saturday, I just get goosebumps. Not exactly Nobel Prize material. Jana tilted her head. But it is deeper. Your body responds to emotion physically. That is not common. Not here. Maybe. On Earth, it's normal. Still, you are being studied now. He groaned. Don't remind me. The studies didn't stop. Soon, the medical wing had compiled an entire presentation on Project Weather Reaction. Orion was listed as the sole subject. A visiting dignitary from the Ketheri Dominion even requested a private demonstration. Orion stood awkwardly in a cold room, arms bare, while a dozen alien officials observed in silence. Begin, the lead Ketheri said. He shivered. This isn't going to get less weird, is it? Back in his quarters, Orion finally called home. His sister answered. You're famous now, she said. Mom's been watching the news feeds. I didn't think Goosebumps would be my claim to fame. You always were a little weird. Own it. Orion sat back on his bunk, rubbing his arms. The station was warmer now, but the memory of that Earthrise still lingered just enough to raise a faint ripple of bumps. He smiled faintly. Maybe this wasn't so bad. But then came the accident. During a scheduled pressure drill, the station's outer hull experienced a microfracture. The corridor Orion was in lost partial pressure. Emergency systems kicked in, but the temperature plummeted before lockdown was complete. He fell hard, the chill biting through his clothes like knives. His fingers went numb. He crawled toward the emergency panel, slammed the override. Alarms blared. Within seconds, the corridor sealed. Medical teams found him slumped near the panel, lips blue, skin covered in deep goosebumps. They rushed him to the infirmary. His core temperature was dangerously low. Mild frostbite on his hands and feet. Muscle rigidity. He spent 3 days in recovery, wrapped in thermal gel blankets, barely speaking. Jana visited on day 2. You almost froze, she said, voice quiet. Yeah, he murmured. Guess I overachieved on the weather reaction. She didn't laugh. You risked dermal collapse. That is not funny. He looked at her, eyes tired. I didn't do it on purpose. I know. But you survived. Because your body warned you. Those bumps your reflex, they are more than anomaly. He didn't answer. By the 5th day, he was walking again. Slowly, with support. Therapists helped him regain movement in his frostbitten fingers. No permanent damage, but the pain lingered. The goosebump phenomenon was no longer a curiosity. It was part of the station's emergency training modules now. Recognize early signs of human hypothermic distress, dermal piloerection. His name was in the footnotes. Weeks later, at a student symposium, he stood before a mixed species audience. I used to think goosebumps were just a weird leftover from mammals with more hair. But it's more than that. It's a signal, a defense. And yeah, sometimes it's emotion. Sometimes it's fear, or awe, or cold. But it's always a message from the body. I didn't ask to be studied, but if it helps someone else survive a cold corridor or understand what their human friend is feeling, it's worth it. He stepped down to quiet applause. Not thunderous, but real. Back in the classroom, Yulger nodded at him. Weather reaction. You have redefined the term. I'll take that as a compliment. You should, but we will continue to monitor. Orion sighed. Of course you will. Janta approached him after class. I have been practicing emotional stimulus. Attempting to generate your reaction. It is difficult. You don't have to, he said. I want to understand. Not just the bumps, but the feeling behind them. Orion smiled faintly. Then start with Earthrise. She blinked. Is that a location? No. It's a view. I'll show you. The observation dome above Deck 7 wasn't built for lectures. It was meant for quiet stargazing, reflection, maybe a birthday gathering if someone booked far enough ahead. But that morning, it was packed elbow to tentacle with students, faculty, and several off-duty crew members pretending they were just passing through. A low hum of conversation filled the dome, broken only by the occasional automated voice announcing station diagnostics. A thin layer of condensation haloed the ceiling glass where the artificial atmosphere met the cold vacuum beyond. The stars pulsed in silence. Orion adjusted the collar of his thermoregulation undershirt. He hadn't planned to wear it again so soon, but the station's education committee insisted on another demonstration this time, not in a lab, but in public. A Kethri student named Rel leaned sideways from the second row, his armored carapace clicking softly as he shifted. Does your skin alter in different patterns depending on the sensation? Not really, Orion said. It's not like mood rings or anything. Rel looked disappointed. Oh. That would be categorically more efficient. Janta, seated next to him with a steaming cup of kel root broth balanced between her fingers, glanced up at Orion. If it is involuntary, what value does the signal hold? Other than confusion. It's not about being useful, Orion said. It's just part of the package. Professor Yilger, floating near the back, raised one limb and rotated slowly his version of calling the room to attention. Orion cleared his throat. Okay, thanks for showing up. Again, I guess this is now a real thing. Someone laughed. He wasn't sure who. I'm not doing this to be weird, even though it definitely is. They've asked me to explain what happens to my body under a specific kind of stress, one that triggers an instinct we don't really think about. So today, I'm going to try something new. He pulled a slim data chip from his pocket and inserted it into the dome's central console. The lights dimmed. A projection flared to life overhead, a view of Earth, taken from lunar orbit, the sun cresting over the curve of the horizon, casting the planet in soft blues and gold. Several students leaned forward. Even those who'd seen it before didn't speak. Orion stood beneath the projection, arms bare. This is what I saw my first time off planet. I wasn't cold. I wasn't scared. But I felt something I didn't have a word for. Maybe homesickness. And yeah, I got goosebumps. He held out his arm. Tiny raised bumps dotted the skin. Not dramatic, but clear against the glow of the projection. A Thenari student with iridescent scales tilted her head. Your dermal ridges are symmetrical. Is that common? I guess. I've never measured. Rel leaned forward again. You said this can happen from memory. Could it also result from hypothetical scenarios? You mean like imagining something emotional? Yes. For instance, the destruction of your birthplace. Orion blinked. Probably not the best example. Apologies. I was attempting maximum emotional contrast. Professor Yilger hovered closer. Proceed with the next phase, Earthborn. I didn't know there was a next phase. You will now engage in controlled thermal induction. A technician approached, rolling a portable temperature emitter. We'll drop the air around you by 20 degrees. Your body will react. Orion sighed. You know, most people just use a thermometer. Visual confirmation is more instructive, Yilger said. The emitter hissed softly. Cold air spilled around Orion's legs and shoulders. He clenched his jaw. The goosebumps returned more aggressively this time, crawling up his arms and neck. Several students began sketching diagrams. Others took readings with handheld instruments. Your circulatory index is adjusting, Janta observed. Capillaries constricting to preserve core warmth. Yep, Orion said, teeth chattering slightly. Classic human reflex. The technician input a command. The temperature dropped another notch. Orion winced. Okay, that's enough. I'm not a penguin. The emitter powered down. Warm air returned with a faint rush. He rubbed his arm slowly, the bumps already fading. Yilger circled him once. Your tolerance is higher than initial assessments indicated. Interesting. I've had worse, Orion muttered. Once got caught in a Wisconsin snowmelt with wet socks. This is practically a spa. A few alien students exchanged confused glances. Is that a survival environment? Someone asked. No, Orion said. It's a mistake you only make once. After the session, most of the crowd filtered out. Orion stayed behind to collect his things. Janta remained as well, sipping the last of her broth, now lukewarm. Have you considered submitting your reflex to the Alliance Physiology Archive? She asked. They already have more than enough data, but none from a subject aware of the reflex while it occurs. That's rare. Orion shrugged. I'm not trying to be a case study, yet you keep allowing them to observe. Because it's easier than arguing. She paused. You could refuse. He glanced at her. Why do you care? Because you are adapting, and not just physiologically. Orion packed the projector chip into its case. I'm adapting because I have to, not because I want to be the weird skin guy. That is not how the others see you. He gave her a sideways look. Janta set down her empty cup. They see someone whose body speaks without permission. That is fascinating, and a little enviable. He didn't have a reply for that. Later that cycle, he returned to the medical wing for follow-up scans. The chief station medic, a long-limbed recreant named Morin, met him at the door. Still intact, Morin asked, taking his vitals. More or less. Morin checked the readings. You're showing minor dermal fatigue, probably from the repeated thermal cycling. Is that dangerous? Not unless you plan to spend a week in cryo. Orion lay back as the scanner passed over him. The machine beeped softly. Morin tapped the results into a tablet. Look, Orion said. How long is this going to be a thing? I mean, Goosebumps aren't exactly cutting-edge science. Morin didn't look up. On Earth, no. But in the broader alliance, your species is still under open classification. Every quirk is data. Feels like I'm the only one being poked. You're the only one here who volunteered. I didn't volunteer. You didn't say no. Orion sighed. You sound like Janta. Smart individual. The skin finished. Morin handed him a clean bill of health. Just keep track of nerve sensitivity, the medic said. Too much repetition and the signal might dull. You're saying I could run out of goosebumps? Not permanently. But reactions get stale when overused. Orion left the infirmary and wandered the halls for a while. The station was in its evening cycle now. Lights dimmed, corridors quieter. The scent of sterilized air mixed with someone's leftover meal packet. He stopped near one of the viewport alcoves and leaned against the frame. Outside, a slow-moving cargo freighter docked with one of the lower rings. Tiny maneuvering thrusters lit up like embers in the dark. Janta found him there, a few minutes later. You left before I could ask something, she said. He didn't look away from the window. What now? If the reflex is tied to emotion, what emotion gives the strongest reaction? He considered that. Probably fear. But that's not the one I like using. Which one do you prefer? He turned slightly. Hope. She tilted her head. Explain. He hesitated, then tapped the glass with one knuckle. You see that ship? Somewhere on it is a guy thinking about his kid back home, or a woman planning her retirement, or someone just hoping they make it to the next stop. That feeling, that forward motion, it sticks with you. And that causes your dermal pattern? Sometimes. Yeah. Janta stared at him for a long time. We do not have an equivalent. That's okay. Not everything has to translate. They watched the freighter finish docking in silence. You know, Orion said quietly, I used to think this whole thing was just embarrassing. But maybe it's not so bad being the guy with the weird skin reaction. Janta nodded once. It is not embarrassing. It is a language. One from the body. And you are fluent. He laughed softly. Great. I'll add that to my resume. The station lights dimmed again, signaling the start of night cycle. Orion pulled his sleeves down and turned toward the sleeping quarters. As he walked away, Janta stood alone by the viewport, one hand lightly pressed to the glass. She breathed in slowly, as if waiting for something. Then, almost imperceptibly, a faint ripple moved across the surface of her arm. Not goosebumps, but close. Orion arrived at the physiology lab 30 minutes earlier than scheduled, mostly to avoid the usual gaggle of curious students pretending not to watch him. He hadn't slept much. The station's recycled air had felt drier than usual, and his skin was itching in places that weren't even exposed during the last round of tests. He sat on the edge of the diagnostic bench, swinging his legs a little, waiting for Dr. Morin. The medbay's ambient lighting hummed faintly, casting pale reflections along the sterilized glass walls. He stared at his own distorted reflection in the cabinet door. His face looked thinner than when he'd first arrived on Hesperia. Not unhealthy, just tired. The door slid open. You're early, said Morin, already gloved and holding a portable dermal reader. Didn't feel like being paraded through the corridor again, Orion muttered. Understandable, Morin replied. Did you apply the emollient last night like I showed you? Twice. Still itchy. Morin ran the reader over Orion's forearm. Dryness is within tolerance. No sign of inflammation. You're hyper-aware of the skin now. That can make minor irritation feel worse. Like phantom goosebumps. Morin didn't laugh. If that's what you want to call them, sure. There was a knock or the closest thing to one against the outer panel. A soft pulsating light, followed by a low-pitched chime. Jana entered without waiting. Her species didn't really do knocking. I was told he would be here, she said, walking in with a tablet in one hand and a small, translucent orb in the other. He is, Morin said, not looking up. But this is a medical appointment. I am aware. This is related. You brought a prop? Orion asked, eyeing the orb. It's a memory capsule, she said. From my home colony. It records ambient emotional resonance. That's a thing. It is calibrated to my own neurological patterning. I thought it might detect the moment your reaction begins. Morin raised his head. That's not a terrible idea. Orion narrowed his eyes. Wait, so you're on board with this? If it keeps you from being shoved into another ice chamber, yes. Janta stepped closer. You said the reflex is strongest with hope. I would like to test that. Right here? Now. We are both here. The moment is efficient. Morin handed Orion a thermal blanket. Wrap that around your legs. I'm not dropping the temperature again just to test an orb. Orion complied, then motioned to Janta. Okay, what now? She held the orb between them, its pale surface beginning to glow faintly. You need to recall something that gave you a future you weren't sure existed. Not joy, not nostalgia, possibility. He looked down, fingers tightening around the edge of the bench. That's a very specific ask. You've done it before. Orion exhaled slowly. All right. He closed his eyes. Not the Earthrise again. That memory had been used up. Instead, he thought of the message he'd received 3 months into his stay, the one from his dad. The man had never been good with words, but that day he'd sent a video file. No lengthy speech. Just a backyard shot of Orion's childhood dog running in circles, chasing a drone. And a single line, still waiting for you to throw the ball. Orion opened his eyes. His arms were peppered in goosebumps. The orb pulsed green. Janta leaned in. That was it. Morin scanned him again. Pulse steady. Skin temperature dropped slightly. Reflex triggered without environmental prompt. No kidding, Orion said. I could feel it happen. Janta nodded. Your species has internalized the abstract and rendered it tactile. That's an evolutionary paradox. Is that a compliment? It's a confession of envy. Morin stepped back. Well, I'd say that's enough excitement for one appointment. Orion stood, tugging the blanket off his legs. So, what now? Do I get a certificate? Successfully demonstrated emotionally induced piloerection. You get a medical clearance in 2 weeks without testing, Morin said. Unless you start shedding skin. Not planning on it. He walked with Janda toward the exit. Outside the lab, the corridor was quiet. Shift change wasn't for another hour. I don't get it, he said. Why are you so interested in this? It's just a biological hiccup. I was raised in a system where emotion was considered secondary to logic. We are taught behavior before feeling. You are the opposite. That's not always a good thing. No, but it's real. And it's visible. Your body betrays your mind in ways we cannot fake. They reached the lift. The panel lit up as they approached. I have a question, Janta said as they stepped inside. Only one. Do you think your species will ever stop reacting that way? Will you evolve past it? He leaned against the wall. Probably not. We still have fingernails, and we don't climb trees anymore. Then perhaps it is not a flaw. The lift stopped on the residence level. They stepped out. I've been meaning to ask, Orion said. That thing you did at the viewport? You touched the glass. I remember. Were you trying to trigger something? She hesitated. I thought I might replicate your sensation. I did not. But I did experience a new form of stillness. That's something. I archived the moment in my capsule. I labeled it almost. He stopped walking. That's actually kind of beautiful. My people do not use that word. Maybe they should. They reached the communal lounge, mostly empty aside from a few second cycle students hovering around a game board. Janta gestured toward the seating alcove. Will you stay after the term ends? She asked. Not sure. I've got a spot waiting back home. But it's just a research assistant role. Then why not stay? I don't know. I guess I thought I'd do my part, Show the flag, then leave when my term was up. You've done more than that. I started as the guy with weird skin reactions. Now I'm the guy who gets invited to lectures I don't understand. You are also the guy who made us question what a signal really is. He looked at her. You know, I spent the first month here trying to blend in. That clearly failed. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that now. She stood. I should return to my quarters. I have a calibration session early. He gave a small wave. Thanks for the orb thing. That was different. It was necessary. She left without another word. Later that night, Orion sat by the viewport, this time alone. The stars hadn't changed. The station still made its soft hum, the occasional hiss of pressure regulation valves breaking the silence. He rolled up one sleeve, just enough to see his forearm. Smooth. He tapped a note into his data pad. Symptoms, none. Triggers, memory, temperature, emotion. Response, harmless. Language, maybe. He closed the file. The next morning, he woke without an alarm. For the first time since arriving on Hesperia, he didn't feel like he was on display. There were no new tests scheduled. No follow-ups. Morin had signed off. The physiology department had closed the observation file. The station administration had moved on to the next oddity, a Martian-born cadet who apparently could metabolize synthetic protein packs without gagging. He walked to the classroom wing, not because he was required to, but because he wanted to see the dome again. The projection had been turned off, but the memory lingered. He found Jana there, already watching the stars. You came early, she said. I thought I'd beat the crowd. There is no crowd. Exactly. They stood in silence for a while. I think I'll stay, Orion said. She didn't respond right away. That makes sense. I'm not done explaining myself. Good. Because we are not done listening. He looked down at his arm again. Nothing visible. No signal. But the feeling was there, just under the skin. A message written in bumps, in silence, in moments. A weather reaction. And somehow more than that,